Welcome to Port Hostage Diplomacy. We work to free hostages and the unjustly detained around the world. I'm Darren Nair. Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe is a British citizen and a charity worker. She has been held hostage in Iran since 3rd April 2016. Her husband, Richard Ratcliffe, was on a hunger strike for 21 days outside the UK Foreign Office, which is right next to the Prime Minister's office. Now, Richard had 4 demands for Prime Minister Boris Johnson. Number 1, acknowledge Nazanin and the other British citizens held in Iran as hostages. Number 2, punish the perpetrators. Demand number 3, keep the promise to settle the debt. Now, what Richard is talking about here is the £400 million unpaid debt that Britain owes Iran, which is over 40 years old. Nazanin is being held hostage by the Iranian regime to force the British government to repay this debt. And demand number 4, commit to end state hostage taking, also known as hostage diplomacy, in the JCPOA-Iran nuclear deal negotiations. Now, thankfully, Richard has ended his hunger strike on Saturday, which was day 21. He promised Nazanin he would do so because their 7-year-old daughter Gabriella needs both her parents. Now, if you would like to find out more about Richard's hunger strike, the reasons why Nazanin was taken hostage, the deplorable conditions of her detention, as well as the amazing campaigning Richard has done throughout these last 5.5 years with the families of other hostages, please do listen to our last 2 episodes. This week's episode is part 3 of our coverage of Richard's hunger strike. I speak to Richard himself to find out how he's recovering, his thoughts on the Free Nazanin debates in the Houses of Parliament that took place yesterday and the day before, as well as what's next for the Free Nazanin campaign. Here's our conversation. You were on a hunger strike for 21 days. It's been 3 days since you ended your hunger strike. How are you feeling?
So probably better than when I entered it. By the end, it was getting quite tough, and I was certainly struggling the last few days, feeling very short of energy. 3 days on, I've had a few meals, not much food, been limited to 800 calories a day, and I've been down to see the hospital a couple of times. So straight after, went to the hospital, and was again there yesterday, and we'll be going again tomorrow. And they've basically been checking to see bloods and so on. I feel gradually better and stronger, but it's quite complex when you come off a hunger strike, in that obviously when you're not eating, all your nutrients go down. But when you start eating again, it's not as simple as they'll go up. Some go up, but others go down more as a response to the food. So they wanted to admit me on the Saturday, and actually, in fact, they wanted to admit me again yesterday. We'll see how it goes tomorrow. I've just had a meal and I'm sitting here thinking, it's, it's creaking in my body to go through it. But it was a very important campaigning moment for us. It felt like we received a huge lot of support and care, and physically it's creaky. So far, no major complications have emerged. That doesn't mean they won't in the next few days. The most dangerous time was immediately after a hunger strike, not during it. But touch wood that we get through it. I think, I'm upbeat. It felt like it made a difference.
So you lost 12 kilograms, is that right?
Yes. So I mean, candidly, was probably a bit overweight going into it, following all those years in lockdown, or a year and a half in lockdown. And so I went down quite a lot. And of course, partly because it was, we were camping in the cold. So more energy was used in keeping warm than would have been if it had been done in room temperature, or even camping in the summer. So lost a lot of weight. And certain things like my potassium levels were really low. A couple of other things were, in the red zone, not necessarily in the oh my God, you can't leave hospital zone. But certainly medical advice was, we think you should stay in. It's not a thing to do lightly, and it's not a thing to be flippant about. and we probably pushed it as far as we could, with the chances of being safe afterwards being reasonable. Not great, but reasonable. And we'll see. I think the first time I did a hunger strike, which was only for 2 weeks, I kind of, okay, well, it's, it's a bit tough afterwards, but you bounce back. Actually, I think I've pushed my body pretty hard this time.
Well, we hope you recover soon and no complications. And it shows that you lost 12 kilograms. I remember Nazanin asking you to keep your beard for a few days when she first saw you on Saturday when you came home. But Gabriella said no and wanted you to shave it off straight away. And looking at you right now, I see Gabriella got her way.
I am indeed beardless. So that's exactly right. Nazanin wanted a sort of, kind of a romantic holiday figure, I suppose, rather than a clean-shaven accountant. I still wanted to have a sort of, beard and so on. And Gabriella didn't want someone who was scratchy to cuddle. So it was quite straightforward in her logic. And as I said to her, well, I think Gabriella's got a call on this one. You're far away. I can see her needs are a lot more straightforward. So we agreed that when Nazanin comes back, we'll go on holiday, and then I, can grow another beard, and that can be part of a sort of a nice holiday atmosphere rather than associated with a hunger strike. I certainly feel a lot cleaner now, having it all off and back to normal. I think probably look a bit younger. Partly just because I'm thinner again, rather than a middle-aged overweight man. I think for Gabriella, she was looking for things to get back to normal, and actually has been a bit frustrated this week. So I had promised her I'd be picking her up from school every day. Actually on Monday, I was in hospital all day. I was in at 9:30, didn't get out of there until after school pickup time, so until about 4:00. So she was, really upset that I'd not kept that promise. And probably all the emotions of, having neither her mum nor dad these past 3 weeks and being looked after by different family members, but not having them around, and the disruption of different people in the flat. And it was, as you'll recall, it was a big mess, in fact, because everyone was just surviving. And we're not unpacked or sorted out or decamped. I suspect that will take a couple of weeks to get back to normality. But certainly for her, getting back to the routine of school pickup and various different things is quite important for her sense of safety as much as anything else.
There have been debates in the Houses of Parliament, both the House of Lords and the House of Commons, about the British government's efforts to free Nazanin and the fact that they need to do much better. What are your thoughts on these debates?
That's right. So probably one of the things that came out of the hunger strike was a huge build-up of parliamentary concern and impatience that this has been allowed to drag on for so long. And there is something genuinely abnormal about a British citizen being on hunger strike in front of his government to get the government to pay attention and do something. So we had an urgent question in the House of Lords yesterday, and today we had what's called a Westminster Hall debate, which is a really long one, like an hour and a half. And I was at the debate today, and the one yesterday not so much. I saw that on telly. Yesterday, I thought the government's response was quite unnerving. There was, a very good showing from the Lords, asking lots of really good questions about, when are we moving on the debt? What are we doing to challenge Iran's hostage taking? What's going on? And the minister answering, Lord Goldsmith, we said a load of tosh, if I'm honest. Really quite hardened positions. But we checked them again today, and we'll check them again with the Foreign Office directly, in writing and verbally. He was saying, listen, we can't possibly pay our debt back because then it would look like we're paying ransoms for hostages, which is completely the cart before the horse. And far more hardened position than they've ever said before. And he wouldn't use the word British. So he didn't ever refer to Nazanin as British. It was always the dual nationals, as though there is this sort of hierarchy of citizenship. And there are two tiers of citizenship. And there are those who really care about the real British, and then there's those who happen to have a British passport. But we all know they're minorities and probably a different colour. So I think that was shameful. and certainly was fairly bleak yesterday, not least because the government tried to pressure the House of Commons in the debate today not to talk about the debt, where my instinct was just to tell the newspapers about that, and that's what I did. And then the Speaker overruled and gave us a waiver, as it's called, to be able to talk about whatever you want, and that there isn't a restriction. Today's debate I thought was excellent. So it was an hour and a half. It was a Westminster Hall debate normally has like sort of 5 or 6 MPs turn up, if I'm honest. This one had over 50. There was standing room only. There was plenty of people who wanted to speak who couldn't. Lots of interventions, some really excellent points from Conservative MPs, as well as SNP and Labour and Lib Dems. We'd been worried that it would just end up being sort of an oppositional debate with just opposition MPs and then the minister defending, but it wasn't. It was cross-party, and there must have been 25 voices saying to the government, "Listen, this is debt. It is honourable to pay a debt. The failure to pay the debt, of course, creates problems, and it does not make sense that there has been no way to do that." I think the minister was quite shaken by the end. He was struggling to finish his speech and get his points across. Got challenged quite robustly, mainly on the debt, but also on, well, what have you done with diplomatic protection? And his answer was weak to the point of disingenuous. It's the only bit I reacted in the thing was like, I can't believe you've got away with it. He's trying to say that twice. So what he said was, well, yes, we invoked diplomatic protection in Nazanin's case, because I'd asked them explicitly, I want you to set out what you've done with it in the last 2 years. But as when we invoked it, we said it might not achieve anything. And indeed, that's been approved. And it's a great shame. But the reason is because Iran doesn't recognize dual nationality, which is such a combination of lies. It's untrue. The reality is that the UK has achieved nothing with diplomatic protection because it has used diplomatic protection not one bit. And there are various things we've been pushing the government to do, and they haven't done any of them. But Iran's attitude to dual nationality or single nationality, or even diplomatic protection, is irrelevant legally. It's like me sending my navy to you and then saying, well, my navy didn't defeat you because actually, as it turns out, you don't like boats. It's irrelevant. Like, your navy goes in, you do it, the other side, responds to the reality they're given. The UK clearly, the Foreign Office clearly pretended, or decided it didn't want to have done it and pretended it away and hasn't done anything with it. He was asked a number of questions about whether he was going to invoke it for another case, and I'm sure his case, and was very cagey, basically saying, well, it doesn't really achieve much, so we're probably not sure whether we're going to do it. That's the only bit where I thought he was saying something new but problematic. Otherwise, it was the same platitudes. We were looking to those debates to get a sense of has the government's position moved. I think what is clear from the last 2 days is no, the government's position hasn't moved. It's still waiting for something, still something's blocked. We don't get to see what. But probably there is more and more open condemnation, and open. I don't know what the word is. I don't know what the word is. Like just astonishment at the failure of the government being maintaining these false lines, clearly false. So I think the government will have walked away feeling exceedingly exposed. Both houses are making it perfectly clear that the government's position is not good enough. That was being said repeatedly over the minister's words. And it's right. The government's position is indefensible, and that's why it offers no credible defence whatsoever. So I came away today a lot more upbeat than I was at this time yesterday. This time yesterday, we were still battling about whether we were able to talk about the debt. I'd just seen the House of Lords nonsense from the minister. Where it takes us, I don't know. I think what was clear is we have a consensus across the House to resolve this. People saying, listen, we've had 200 constituency messages on this issue. A big issue would get 20 normally. It's almost unprecedented. And yeah, that can only be a good thing. We still don't know at this point what are the blockages. It doesn't make sense at this point. So I think my honest sense is we have to keep battling, and battle we will.
So your hunger strike didn't bring Nazanin home, but it definitely put a lot of pressure on the British government. It received global media coverage and so much support within the UK and around the world. You now have this momentum where so many more people are aware of Nazanin's case, aware of Iran's hostage-taking, and also aware of Britain's inability and lack of will to protect its own citizens overseas. What are you doing to take advantage of this momentum? What's next for the Free Nazanin campaign?
Okay, it's a really good question, and it's probably a bit early to say since I'm still in recovery mode. But I think that's right. I think it feels now like it did back in autumn 2017 that there's a recognition that the government has messed up, and that the government needs to step up and resolve things, and it's failing Nazanin at a fundamental level. I think it's a different recognition. Back in 2017, it was fairly blamed on the then Foreign Secretary, now Prime Minister, for his mistake. There's more of a policy understanding now that there's a policy gap here around Iran's hostage-taking, around the UK's response to it, and the timidity of that response, to the point which doesn't make sense to anyone looking at it. In terms of next steps, I think we need to look carefully at what we can do in Parliament. That's about as big a debate as we can. I mean, Jeremy Corbyn spoke at it, said that it was the biggest Westminster Hall debate he could remember in his parliamentary history. Well, he's been there for 40 years. The government has a remarkable record of deflecting and downplaying and calming down again. So I don't think we should be resting on laurels. So there's a need to think, well, what can we do beyond that? How can Parliament impose a will on the government on this issue beyond just having various debates saying, listen, government, you're useless, and getting the platitudes back? Certainly there's a strong appetite to bring the Foreign Secretary or the Prime Minister to talk about this. Again, it was the junior minister who was the fall guy who had to, offer up the government's excuses. And beyond that, I think there are points we can follow up with the lawyers. When I was talking there about the diplomatic protection stuff, the bits around the government's legal claims on sanctions and so on, which just don't stack up. I think we should be calling them out a bit more. And certainly, around, he was asked quite bluntly to acknowledge nothing was a hostage. He wouldn't do it again. Bits to start follow up on there. In terms of what people can do in relation to that, I think we do need to think how we can, build on that support, both within the parliamentary system, but also outside, to just, this is a government, our government, the British government, responds to populist pressure in quite a straightforward way. They've had a series of U-turns. I think we clearly are a problem for the government. Whether we're still a problem for the Prime Minister, or whether he's sort of successfully keeping us, shouting at his juniors, remains to be seen. I think we stepped up again in awareness of the government's role in that compared to previously. But we've been here before, and the government's got off the hook. So I don't know in the end. I think it's a mixture of getting better and stepping away from the white heat of the hunger strike moment to work out where we are and what can we do and what's reasonable. And it probably is working with a number of the other families. Actually the last 3 weeks, it's all been, our focus has been on Nazanin, getting Nazanin home, which is slightly different from what were doing, say, 6 months ago. And it, provokes unsettling dynamics between different families and so on, because obviously the pressure is for us. It's not necessarily for other families, and it reverberates in different ways. So, yeah, I was talking afterwards with our lawyers at Redress, guys in Amnesty, about, okay, what can we do next? And it's probably not much more than, well, let's sit down and work things through and then see how we can mobilise all those great amnesty groups and all they do, how we can mobilise the legal stuff, what we do with the media, and a long rambling answer to say, I don't know, but I think this is an opportunity to really push the government to protect people better. And, I do have a responsibility to try and make the best use of that.
So in the meantime, members of the public can help by sharing Nazanin's story with everyone they know. You can keep writing to your members of parliament. You can write a letter to your local newspaper and let them know why you think it's important the British government brings Nazanin home and better protects British citizens overseas. And tie it to how that relates to you and the people you know in your life and how it could potentially affect them too one day. So those are just some suggestions of what you can do to help. Now, is there anything else you'd like to mention, Richard?
I know, I'm probably just a big thank you. We had a huge, overwhelming level of support, but also at a more simple level. I experienced an awful lot of kindness these past 3 weeks from an awful lot of kind, lovely, caring people up and down the country on social media, but also in person who came to visit. That's a really rare experience. It's a really nurturing experience. And it is something I will treasure for the rest of my days. So thank you to everyone who has been part of that experience and who's, shared their kindness with us.
I've said this many times and I've always meant it. We'll be right here by your side until Nazanin comes home. Thank you for taking the time to speak to us, and we wish you a speedy recovery.
Thank you.
Now, for those of you who are not familiar with my background, I've been campaigning to free hostages and the unjustly detained for almost 6 years. I used to be a director on the board of Amnesty International UK. I've left Amnesty now, and I decided to create a media company that includes this podcast to continue my work to free hostages and the unjustly detained. I get contacted by the families of current hostages around the world, especially those held in Iran. These are families that are yet to go public with their loved one's case. Whenever this happens, there are 2 people I always consult with: Richard Ratcliffe and Jason Rezaian. Jason Rezaian is an American and a Washington Post reporter. In July 2014, when Jason was the Post's Tehran bureau chief, he was arrested by the Iranian regime and held hostage for 544 days in Iran's notorious Evin prison. Shortly after Jason's release in early 2016, Nazanin Zaghari-Ratcliffe was taken hostage by the same regime and held in the same prison. Jason has created an amazing podcast that tells you his story. It's called 544 Days and is available exclusively on Spotify. Please do check it out. Since Jason's release, he has been tirelessly working with other hostage families to free their loved ones, including Richard Ratcliffe.
I'm Jason Rezaian, and I'm a journalist for the Washington Post. I got to know Richard Ratcliffe in 2016. I had been held hostage by the regime in Iran from July of 2014 until January of 2016, when I was released in a negotiated settlement between Iran and the U.S. Not long after I was released, Nazanin was arrested. And it wasn't too long after that before Richard and I connected. He was looking for advice and support in his efforts to free Nazanin and bring Nazanin and their daughter Gabriella back to the UK. I was very ready to do whatever I could to help. I'm shocked that it's been now almost 6 years that Richard and I have been communicating and plotting different ways to try and raise awareness around Nazanin's case and also push for a resolution. I've written stories about Nazanin. I've done television interviews, but I've also developed a real fondness and admiration for Richard, who is part of this strange family of hostage loved ones and survivors that we have been kind of cobbling together around the world in recent years. And I've looked at Richard as a kindred spirit throughout. We speak regularly, and I'm always astounded by his ability to be gracious, to maintain a sense of humor and perspective, and to just really always advocate for his family, for his wife and his daughter. It's a special gift that he has, and I think I have learned a tremendous amount from Richard in the last few years that we have been communicating and sharing ideas, information, and strategies about how to put an end to state-sponsored hostage taking. For me, as someone who is home now and whose ordeal is over, it's easy to make a decision that I want to work with others to try and end this heinous practice. But for Richard, who has been mired in it in real time for nearly 6 years, it's an incredible credit and testament to his character that he is so invested in not only trying to end his own family's ordeal, but in trying to end this practice once and for all, make it harder for governments around the world, whether it's Iran or other governments, to do this to innocent individuals, but also to raise the stakes for democratic governments like the UK, like the US, like Germany, France, Canada, Australia, and other allies, to say, hey, look, your citizens are being taken hostage and used as leverage. You must stand up to this evil and come up with adequate deterrence. That hasn't happened yet. But thanks to Richard, I believe that we're closer to forcing that issue among responsible governments. And I deeply believe that when this crime against individuals is finally rooted out and eradicated, it will be in no small part because of Richard and his efforts. I firmly believe that if and when this problem is eradicated, we will look back on Richard and his efforts to not only raise awareness about the issue of state hostage taking and hostage diplomacy, but also coming up with effective tools to deter it. He will be credited as an individual who was involved with this at a turning point in the history of the problem. And I think everyone owes him a debt of gratitude for his commitment, but more than that, for his commitment to humanity.
If I've learned anything campaigning with the families of hostages these last 6 years, it's that campaigning to free a loved one held hostage by a foreign government is a marathon, not a sprint. We're in it for the long haul, and we need good, caring people like you to join us. Let's work together to free Nazanin. Thank you for listening, and take care.